Okay. So Jung had this idea that the shadow was the apprentice work and the anima and the animus was the master's work. So if you think about individuation like that, it would seem that he had this trajectory, that he had this process that you need to first work through your shadow to get to the greater self. Now, a lot of New Age stuff, as you rightly put out there, is that it's like, let's jump over it and let's make it pretty and let's, everything's going to be okay if I just don't look at myself. And as I've said before, is that I think people believe that, and this might not necessarily be a belief that's stemmed from a personal thing, but I've had many experiences where people say to me, but Max, if I look at my unconscious, that's where the devil is. I'm taking a literal translation from what, there's been various or variations on what people have said to me, but that's what they are afraid of, that the devil actually lives inside. The truth of the matter is you live inside your unconscious, but without knowing its contents, how can you really truly say that you're progressing as a human being? A lot of people would even say, I don't have an unconscious. Well, this is biologically incorrect.
Yeah.
But it's also very dangerous because by hopping over the shadow, what you're doing is it's almost like you're severing off your limbs to get to the next place. Like for me to get to a better place in my life, I need to cut off my arms and legs. The unconscious is a biological phenomenon. It is. And throughout our lifetimes, we need to work on the content of the unconscious for us to find true progression, for us to find a form in which to progress. So if I think of some of my complexes, there might be, like I've got Sherry. Now she's a mischievous young lady who lives in my unconscious, and her whole game is to find a way of undermining me. So she can come up with many things like duplicity, for instance, or she'll create herself or she'll find herself in a high pressure situation for no conceivable reason. And then my next complex, who's called Guy Fawkes, will come into that and he'll play with Cherry and they'll create a completely explosive situation for me.
Yeah.
Now, through my own personal work, I've been able to take these complexes and work with them and not necessarily stop them, because I think that would again be jumping over the unconscious, but with working through these complexes and giving them space to converse with me and bringing a kind of consciousness to them, it's helped me to more or less stop this self-sabotaging behavior.
Yeah.
And to put myself into more stable situations. Now, I'm not saying it's all the time. Of course, those complexes still exist.
Yeah.
But
like you say, it gives you that awareness, doesn't it, that the complex and how it's playing out for you and what it's creating, and just being aware of that gives you some kind of power back almost, like, gosh, like this is working through you, behaving in that way, and now see it. You don't feel as helpless.
yes, and also when the complex arises, you don't feel so deeply possessed by it, so it doesn't blind you. And the whole thing about complex is they have this ability to blind us in the first instance. But in the second instance, they create what Jung called a telos. As soon as that complex is activated, it puts you on a path to a place that you've already been to.
Yeah.
And then when you find yourself in that place again, whether it's heartbroken or without a job or without money or in a irreparable situation, it's because your complex was activated months or years before. And that's the whole thing, is that the individuation process is about seeing that telos, about seeing the trajectory and how it works. And it does. In many instances, through this work, through this lexicon, through this language that Jung and his various acolytes have deconstructed for us, the work of working with complexes and dreams and archetypes, there is a possibility to heal and therefore create a deeper meaning to life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's many levels in what you've just spoken about there. You know, when you said the person said about the devil being in them, it even takes a lot of work to get to that point. You know, for many people to even realize that within them is that darker aspect of themselves, the murderer, the devil, whatever you want to call it. Even that's a stage of, you know, self-realization or individuation. And then where do you go from that point once you realize that that's within you? And for
Yeah.
me, I say this in my work with groups, like once we've come to the realization that we are the murderer, the devil, the darker aspects that we don't want to admit to, we're then already creating some kind of healing out in the world around us, because we're then not projecting outside of us all the time that the world's such an evil place and that we've got nothing to do with that. You know, it allows us some ownership that there's something going on with us as individuals that holds these shadows that we're seeing in the collective around us. And that's a huge realization, to realize, like, I'm not a victim here. I'm not a victim. This is an interaction. Everything's interacting with me, the world, the government, everything. And I can no longer just keep blaming, even though we like to blame. I still love a good blame now and again. But you know,
Exactly.
ultimately, collective unconscious that we talk about is made up of this stuff. So talking about,
So
you know, threading the unconscious with the shadow, with the collective unconscious, we're in Jungian realms.
we are, and I think that this is a very, very important part of this conversation that we are having, Colette, because ultimately the whole opportunity here is to take responsibility individually.
Yeah.
Now, that's called anarchy. Anarchy is not about chaos and about being a punk and, you know, graffitiing everything. Anarchy is about self-governance. Now, that's my seeker complex. He wants to be self-governing. Don't tell me what to do, because I will take responsibility for myself. And that's the thing, is that's why I think some people are called to this work, some people do this work, and some people just can't do the work.
Yeah.
Because there is this call to responsibility. There is that. And if I had to give you my own interpretation of individuation, that's where I might divert slightly from my own teachers, is if you can't take responsibility for yourself, please tell me how you're going to teach other people to do it. And that's the thing, is, you know, there's a child in all of us. There's an inner child. There's an inner working that is childlike. We basically childlike adults for the most part. But boy, wouldn't it be great if you could just take responsibility for maybe one aspect of your life? And when something comes up, you go, that is actually about me. And the thing is, if you think about the presidents who occupy the Western governments, how much of all of their personas and their personalities and their complexes are because of us,
Yes.
because we're projecting onto them. And
Completely.
this is the whole thing about, this is why the lexicon of the language is so important, because Jung was building a puzzle with his work. So he started off with, let's call it the unconscious and what inhabits the unconscious, complexes. Now, what do complexes do? Complexes have trajectories, they have projections, they have a connection to the archetype, they're part of the collective unconscious, so he was building a puzzle. And for all of the people who are listening to this recording or who will listen, this is really what Collette and I, that's what we want to put out into the world. We want like-minded individuals who are maybe suffering with themselves or have a lack of meaning in their lives or are finding things overwhelming, is that with a lexicon like this, you can actually take responsibility for an aspect of yourself. And that is empowering. And that empowerment brings, again, now I keep on going on about it, but it brings a meaning to your life that I can't describe in words, because individuation is about this. It's
Yeah.
about this specific stuff. It's about responsibility. It's about self-governing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the deeper you can self-govern, like Jung did, the more individuated you become. You might not be fully individuated and explode into a burst of stars, or
Yeah.
maybe you will,
Yeah. Yeah.
but at least you know that you as a participant in these courses, you're growing the base of that ability to look after yourself, to
Yeah.
husband yourself, to parent yourself. And that in itself is it's a very beautiful journey, because you've opened up doors of perception in the mind where those doors maybe were locked or remained locked or were unknown to you. And that's what this lexicon does. This is what these teachings does. That's why when you come into this work, the best part is about being facilitated by people who've done it before, because that facilitation is a way of being guided and held in the space, because you might confront the devil within you.
Yeah, and I found that with the groups I've run, you know, and you have, is that space just allows for, it gives a focus, it gives us an intention, and every morning there'll be like an application or a process to do. So you're actually giving time to work on yourself and sharing your process and being witnessed in that process and being supported in that process as well. And that is really, like, I think every person in the world should have the space to do that. I think our world would be a different place if everybody had that group to be able to do that in. I mean, that's how I've worked for years with women, you know, because that container is so powerful.
That's really beautifully said, and absolutely. I wish I had said it, but you just said it brilliantly. Is that that's the thing? Is that it's a it's about being held and feeling safe while you're going through this process. It would be nice if everyone could just do it themselves, but it doesn't work like that because, well, I don't know. I can't give you a reason why, but it is.
And it's
It is.
also like, you know, it's touching the places when you're kind of like, you know, I've done it in groups where I've been like, well, this is happening and blah, 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 blah. And then someone's just said to me, who's facilitated, well, have you thought of this? And it's just given me a whole different perspective or a new space for a different reflection. And then I thought, no, I haven't. I haven't thought of that because when you're in the middle of your stuff, like it's really hard to see, isn't it? We all know, we all look at everyone else and we can all say, oh, well, he just needs to get a job or she just needs to shut up or whatever. But we can't ever apply that to ourselves. So we get this space where people are seeing that and able to say, you know, facilitate and in the right way say, well, have you thought about it from this perspective? And that can shatter everything and alter all things. You know, I remember being in a group and just even one comment from a facilitator can actually blow everything I'd thought through the roof. And I thought, why didn't I just think of that? And it actually changed the whole situation in my life. So that's why I love the groups and why I like to create groups for people to work in because of that.
So just to go to a theoretical idea here, which I think might help people to kind of see why we're offering this course, is that dreams are an easy access point into that blind spot. Now, if you take the physiological function of complexes, their physiological function is a defense mechanism. And defense mechanisms naturally create blind spots. So if you think about the physical mechanism of the psyche, the complex is there to not only protect you, but it's also there, it then opens up a place for attack.
Yeah.
And to understand your complexes, you want to be able to understand the full range of the complex so that that point of vulnerability becomes a point that you know. And that's really the point of doing this work, is that a complex will come along, it will possess you, it will blindside you, and you'll be blindsided to certain conceptual or certain realities or certain processes that you are in. But that defense mechanism just proves that there is a thing called a complex. You know what I mean? So that's what I've always found so fascinating about this work, is people talk about these words: psyche, psychology, unconscious, the shadow, complexes, projections. And people look at it like, what in the hell are you talking about? But in truth, today, those old names have neuroscientific
Yeah.
identities.
Yes.
Neuroscientists can say that's the process of what's happening. There's a stimulus, there's a response. That's how the brain works. It responds to stimulus. So whether you're under attack from somebody, or whether you are trying to fulfill one of your instincts or functions, your mind, the neuroscience operates, but Jung didn't have the language that we have today.
Yeah.
But all of these things are proved, these concepts that we're speaking about today, they all have a biological identity today.
Yeah, yeah. And that is what we're gonna go into that and pull all of these are all big theories, aren't they? They're really hard to finite down like we're trying to do. But I think ultimately what we want to do is allow people to come into the group, whether you're a dreamer or not, because one girl said to me, I don't actually dream, and then she said, oh my God, I've just had a dream. And so what happens is sometimes the dream will come through even though you're not a dreamer, but we have other ways to get in if the dream doesn't happen, and that's fine. So we're going to be looking at ways in which we can look at how Jung would look into our own personalities through, as you've mentioned in the call so far, functions, which are our basic instincts, complexes, so an archetype. So just explain again the difference of those three things that we're going to be looking at in our course. What is the complex? What is the archetype? What is the function? How are they different?
It's a very dense question, and I'm going to try and not oversimplify it. No, but I think it's important, because if you're new to this work, Collette, I mean, when you first started at the school, and we were a group of facilitators watching your group, and how people interacting, there was a lot of naivety about the concepts. But as the work progressed, that naivety or that ignorance became a working, functional part of the application work that we were giving you.
Yes.
And that's the whole thing, is that why don't we all just go back to school and study psychology and get it over with and get our PhD in that? But that's not really the function of these courses. The function of the course is to provide you a platform and application work where you can have a relatively soft landing on this work. And that's why, as Collette said, if we could encourage everyone to participate in it through any school platform, that would be amazing. But to answer your question, the function, so if you take, say, all animals have functions.
Yeah.
So they have a reproductive function or a reproductive drive. They've got a drive for shelter or safety. They've got a drive for food. But Jung expanded on those by saying that we've also got this religious function. So we've got an instinctual desire or instinctual drive to seek a higher power, to seek a transcendent self. He called it the transcendent self, or to seek the numinous. But those are all in the base instincts. Those are all housed in what was termed the subconscious. Yeah. So we all have basic drives, okay? All these drives that are driving our biological functions.
Yeah.
From there, you've got your complexes, which are not necessarily have a biological function, as they do have a personality function. So when you develop as a child from about the age of 2 up until, well, throughout your life, you can develop or constellate complexes. But complexes are really how your personality is made up of. What are the quirks of Collette? What are the quirks of Max? What is his particular, is he an artist? Is he a businessman? Is he a doctor? So a lot of my complexes will drive how my life goes, what relationships I seek, or what relationships I seek, not only with other people, but what gives me fulfillment in my job, what gives me fulfillment in music or whatever, so it could be talent, or skills or whatever, and how those skills gather around a complex.
Yeah.
And, like an artistic complex, some people might be a sculptor, other people might be a furniture designer. So, these complexes have different expressions.
Yes.
Whereas the functions have very specific expressions. So a religious function, the individual seeks a religious fulfillment, and they seek it in a group. So it has a very specific channeled expression. and it's ubiquitous amongst all human beings. But complexes have their own flowers and their own trees and their own, they've got their own decorations.
Yeah.
Whereas archetypes are, they are describable by their indescriptibility. So there is a father archetype, so all fathers stem from that father archetype. There's a mother archetype, there's a child archetype, there's, say, the jester archetype. Okay, all of these different archetypes are what Jung said were populated in the collective unconscious. These archetypes are what we could probably refer to as our collective history.
Yes.
All of the, if you take the paintings on the walls of caves from thousands of years ago, those were drawn by hands of people who were possessed by archetypes. So archetypes are the bigger cells, the bigger complexes. But they, unlike complexes, they can kind of be contained to a degree. They can be described. They can be given a definition. Like if you've got a boozy archetype, somebody who enjoys a good hedonistic, time. That hedonist can be defined by that person. Or you've got a gypsy complex where you want to hang out in a caravan and travel the roads. It's contained, it's describable.
Yeah.
But the father archetype has all of the fathers that have ever existed in the world.
Yeah.
And so all of our fathers were different. All of our fathers were the same in many respects, but their characteristics were unique.
Thank you,
and
Max.
how they brought us up.
I think it's important just to, I know that those words are hard to frame, like complex function, because it becomes an organic living material in you when you start doing the work. You start to be aware of the complex and know the complex, and that word attaches itself, and it's a lived experience, isn't it? But just some people might not understand when we're talking complex, archetype, function. I know that's where I was like, whoa, at the beginning. So just to like overview that in the course, they will get to know these internally. They will really start to be able to feel the complexes that are within them, and the archetypes that they're under, and the functions that are coming through the dreams, or through whatever other medium decides to show itself in the group if the dream's not happening for people. So it's about knowing that. I just wanted to get across by explaining, because Jung's work's so vast and so bloody complex and so genius. It really is like genius. It's hard to explain and get to across to people, but I think the biggest thing I wanted to get across in the questions that I've been asked by people is that this is like the inner work. This is what we mean by doing the great work, is getting to know yourself, understand yourself, being able to have this beautiful experience and this, this thirst every day to understand you and your interaction with people and life and all the things around you. So that's what we want to awaken in the course in people, is this kind of deep thirst to want to know how they tick and how the world ticks around them.
And that's essentially why we're tackling the topic of individuation today. It's because the journey of individuation is to understand the self, and the self is all of these things. Whereas complexes are individual, they stand alone by themselves, and they come and go. The functions come and go. The archetypes come and go, but the self is consistent.
Yeah.
When you're born as a self, and you're not whole in yourself. As you grow up, you become deconstructed. And the whole point of individuation is to reconstruct it, or to construct the self again.
And a great illustration would be, like seeing someone who has struggled, in relationships all their lives, never been able to get into a relationship, and then instead of just saying, oh, this is the way it is, I'm rubbish at relationships, I'm never going to end up with someone because it's just the way it is, they realize that actually it's the way it is because of the behavior and all of that, and it can be changed, and they can be in a great relationship, and they have the ability to do something about that. it's completely like empowering and life-changing for people. I've seen it, you know, the different beliefs that people hold about themselves. I'm never going to be rich, I'm never going to have a great job, I'm never going to enjoy life, I'm always going to be this. And then to see what causes that in their life and to take some charge of that and change it is, it's why I'm literally obsessed with the work at the moment, you know, seeing that happening in my own life. And you know, obviously with the work that I do with people, this is all bleeding through to that work, and really people are taking much more ownership, obviously, as a result of my work on myself. So we could go on forever, and I'm just making sure we've answered all the questions, but we have. And the last thing I wanted to just talk about was the marrying of the psychological and the spiritual, because I know we've got a lot of people in the group who are really into spirituality, but I think we've covered that and how Jung, like the two collided for Jung because of, you know, he's interested in the paranormal and so that automatically bled into his work.
Yeah, so that, I mean, Jung termed it as a transcendent function. Human beings are we have a transcendent desire. So if you look at the Christian philosophies, and I don't want to go so much into the religion itself, but the whole idea that you will be redeemed. If you live a good life, you will be redeemed. Your soul shall be redeemed, and your reward will be in heaven. And that, to me, is almost the perfect expression of what the transcendent function looks like in the human mind, is that if we have a soul, where does it go? And where does it, where does it land? You know, and the whole notion of omnipotence and that Christian philosophy is that there is this chance to transcend this self, you know, but it has to start with our own inner search.
Yes.
Because without that inner search, there's no transcendent self. No. Because then it's just you, as far as I'm concerned, then you're just going around in the same circle with the same language, with the same outcomes.
That was my experience until I stepped into this. And just for everyone, all the people in the group who are really deeply spiritual into the group, I worried that the psychological, venture of mine would really kill the mystical and the magical, and it's actually only amplified it. So just to put that to bed for now.
Well, so, Jung would agree with you, Collette. Jung actually would say, you took the words right out of my mouth. Because his spirituality, his own process, his own connection with God was deeply deepened, was profoundly deepened by his own work. And even up until his dying day, people would say, but is there a God? And he would say, of course there is. And the next day he said, well, I don't know if there is. But the whole point is he was saying, my connection to the God that I have is because this work has allowed me to have that system of belief alive within him.
Same with me, it's only amplified it. So exactly. Don't worry, you won't lose your spirituality and your mysticism and your magical. It gets amplified. So thanks, Max, anyway, for engaging in this conversation. I'm sure it's answered a few more questions for people, and I feel it's just got a little bit more gritty into what we're going to be doing beyond even the dream. Like, this is the chunk and the meat of the work that will happen in the course.
Exactly. No, thank you, Collette. I appreciate it.
You. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and hopefully see you all again soon.